I was recently asked to explain what's the difference between Torah and Talmud. I'm going to try to do that in just a few minutes. To begin with, we Jews believe that when Moses went on Mount Sinai, he really received two Torahs, so to speak. One is the written Torah that we know as the Chumash, or the 5 books of Moses, and the other was an oral Torah, or explanations of those 5 books and all the rules and regulations and understandings of Jewish life. In addition to the 5 books, the revealed books of the Torah, the written Torah, includes also the writings of the Jewish prophets and a selection of writings called Ketuvim, the writings, which consists of books of history, books of revealed poetry like the Psalms, and also books of wisdom like Proverbs. And this constitutes the revealed written Torah. What about that oral Torah? So to understand the oral Torah, you have to understand the ways in which the written Torah is, so to speak, incomplete. Imagine, for example, you were to be confronted with something like this. This is the schematic diagram for my gas fireplace. Now, if you understood schematic diagrams and you were an electrician, you could look at this immediately and know immediately how to install one of these things. Well, I don't have that background, and so I can't do that. What I need is I need a teacher. I need somebody to teach me the system, to help me to understand what these terms mean, what these symbols mean, and with that I'm able to actually do what I have to do. The same thing with the Torah. There are many things in the Torah which are left unclear, and we have many commentaries that we study with, which would help us to be able to understand what the text says. But we also have a tradition of oral interpretation and understanding that goes all the way back to Moses and is passed on from teacher to teacher to teacher to teacher, all the way down to us. That tradition remained oral up until about the 2nd century. Once in the 2nd century, when the world began to be a little bit more unstable under Roman rule, the rabbis decided that it was time to start to write down the oral law. And that took a number of different forms. It took the form of midrashim, which are stories or narratives, really mostly on philosophical points in the Torah. There are also midrashim that dealt with law, and ultimately, the ultimate production of the oral law was the Talmud, a huge collection of the lectures and discussions of rabbis over a period of about 400 years, written really in the form almost of note-taking. Everything is written in very short form. Nevertheless, if you were going to study this 1 page a day, as many people do, it would take you 7 years to do it. It's a really big book, and it's really dense. There's lots and lots of things in the Talmud. Now, you'll hear sometimes about crazy things in the Talmud. Well, the fact is, the Talmud is trying to explore points of law. And so, in the process of the discussion, students and teachers will throw out ideas. Now, most of those ideas are rejected. Most of those ideas are going to be tossed out right away, or they may be raised and discussed and picked apart and analyzed and then thrown away. Or alternatively, sometimes they may be accepted. Right? Interestingly enough, the Talmud often does not come to conclusions, and those conclusions are really determined by jurists and scholars in later generations. But nevertheless, there's a huge amount of material in the Talmud. Now, all this interpretation, you might look at this and say to yourself, wait a second, this gives the rabbis an awful lot of power. Are you saying that the rabbis have the power to change the Torah? And the answer is no. Even though the Torah itself says that when we have a problem and when we can't understand something in the Torah, we should go to the scholars of that generation, nevertheless, the scholars have to follow very defined rules and protocols for interpreting the text. And when we look at the rabbis of the Talmud, we're not just looking at any rabbis. We're looking at people who are deeply steeped in the Torah and whose knowledge of Torah is really unsurpassed. And so what we're looking at is the oral Torah, delivered all the way from Mount Sinai, interpreting the written Torah. So it's Torah interpreting Torah, right? Not rabbis interpreting Torah. I hope that helps make a little bit more sense out of it. I hope that you'll take the opportunity also to take a look at a Chumash, take a look at the 5 books of Moses available on the internet, or you may also take a look at some of the copies of the Talmud in English, or in whatever language probably you want on the internet, and really look at the whole text yourself to see things in context. Really encourage you to look at things in context and raise your questions there, and of course I'm always happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.